She sat across from me with her hands folded in her lap, very still, the way people sit when they have already cried all they can cry. Her name was Elena, and she was there because her husband David, 68 years old, 41 years married, had looked at her face the week before and said, "I'm sorry, what was your name again?" He wasn't lost. He knew where he was. He knew the year. He just couldn't place her. She didn't fall apart in my office. She told me she had been watching it happen slowly for almost 2 years, and she thought she understood why. Aging. Just aging. But then she said something that stopped me completely. He did this every single night, for as long as I can remember. Before I tell you what David did every night, I need to show you what was happening inside his brain. Because once you understand it, you will never look at this habit the same way. Here is the most dangerous assumption in neurology. Most people believe that memory loss is simply what getting older feels like. That belief causes people to wave off early warning signs for years. And by the time they stop waving, the window for meaningful change has already narrowed. So let me draw a very clear line for you. Normal aging looks like this. You walk into the kitchen and forget why you went there. You're talking and a name won't come. But an hour later, it surfaces on its own. You need a moment to find a word mid-sentence. These are filing delays. The brain slows down a little, takes longer to retrieve, but the file is still there. It can be found. What is not normal looks like this. A conversation happens, and the next day there is no memory of it at all. Not a fuzzy memory, no memory. The same question gets asked 3 times in 1 hour. A familiar face, someone loved for decades, doesn't connect to a name. The file isn't delayed, it simply isn't there. That distinction matters enormously. And the reason it matters starts with a small, curved structure deep inside the brain called the hippocampus. Think of the hippocampus as your brain's filing clerk. Every experience you have during the day gets handed to this clerk to be stamped, labeled, and sent to long-term storage. Without that stamp, nothing gets filed. New information just drifts away. This is why, in early cognitive decline, the first thing people lose is recent memory. What they ate for breakfast, a phone call from earlier that day, a conversation that just happened. The older files, the ones stamped decades ago, those stay intact longer. That's why someone might forget your name, but remember their wedding day in vivid detail. Now, here is what most people, including most doctors, don't fully appreciate yet. The hippocampus is not just shaped by what happens during your waking hours. It is exquisitely sensitive to what happens while you are unconscious, while you sleep. The health of your memory, your ability to form new memories and clear out toxic waste from the ones you already have, depends almost entirely on the quality of what your brain is doing at night when you are not aware of it. This is not a small point. This is the whole story. If you have ever felt that moment of panic when a name just won't come, when you reach for something that should be right there and your hand closes on air, I want you to understand what that actually means. And more importantly, I want you to understand what it doesn't mean. Because in my neurology clinic, I see people every week who have given up on their own brains. And most of them should not have. Your brain is remarkably resilient, but it needs the right conditions at night to stay that way. So let's talk about what your brain actually does while you sleep. Because most people imagine sleep as simply the absence of activity. The lights go off, the brain rests, the body repairs. That picture is incomplete in a way that I think changes everything. Your brain never fully shuts down, and one of the most important things it does at night only happens at night. There is a system, discovered relatively recently, only confirmed in human patients in 2024, that I think of as the night shift cleaning crew. Its scientific name is the glymphatic system. And if you have never heard of it, you are in good company. Most people's doctors learned medicine before this system was fully understood, which is exactly why it almost never comes up in a standard checkup. Here is how it works. Think of your brain as a busy office building. All day long, as your neurons fire and communicate and process everything you experience, they produce waste. Metabolic byproducts, toxic proteins. One in particular, called beta amyloid, is the same protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. Your brain produces it constantly, just as a byproduct of doing its job. During the day, the office is too busy to clean. People are working, the hallways are full, the cleaning crew cannot get in. But when you fall into deep sleep, specifically the slow, heavy sleep of the early night, what we call slow wave sleep, something remarkable happens. Cerebrospinal fluid begins flooding through the spaces between your brain's cells, flowing along channels surrounding the blood vessels, pushing waste out. The cleaning crew clocks in. The hallways empty. The whole system flushes. Think of it like a garden hose. When the hose is wide open and the pressure is right, water reaches every corner of the garden. Every toxic protein, every metabolic byproduct gets swept away. But when something restricts that flow, when the pressure drops or the hose kinks, waste builds up in the same spots night after night. Not dramatically at first, quietly, invisibly. Here is what makes this so important for everything I want to tell you today. Glymphatic efficiency naturally declines after the age of 60. The cleaning crew gets a little slower. The flow is not quite as strong. That is normal aging. But research now shows this decline can be dramatically accelerated by specific lifestyle factors. Age alone is not the whole story. In some people, the cleaning crew is working at a fraction of its capacity. Not because of age, but because of something they are doing every single night that is actively interfering with the system. When the cleaning crew falls behind, the waste that doesn't get cleared doesn't disappear. It accumulates, slowly, year after year, in the same vulnerable brain regions. And the brain's own immune cells, which are supposed to protect neurons, begin reacting to this buildup. They trigger inflammation. And that inflammation, sustained over years, begins to damage the very tissue it was trying to defend. This is not abstract. This is the biological sequence that we are now watching unfold in patient after patient. And here is where I need to come back to David. Because one of the most well-documented ways to restrict glymphatic flow, to kink that hose every single night, is something millions of people over 60 do without a second thought. Something cheap, available at every pharmacy, and sitting in medicine cabinets across the country right now. Something David did every night for 16 years. Every night for 16 years, David took a Benadryl before bed. Not because he had allergies. He had tried it once during a rough patch of insomnia in his early 50s, and it worked. He fell asleep faster. He woke up less. It was cheap. It required no prescription. It was sold right next to the vitamins. So he kept doing it. Every night. The same pink pill. A habit so ordinary, so unremarkable, that he had never once mentioned it to his doctor. And his doctor had never thought to ask. When Elena told me this, I felt that particular weight that comes when a piece of the picture that was always missing suddenly lands on the table. Diphenhydramine, that is, the active ingredient in Benadryl, in ZQuil, in Unisom sleep tabs, in the nighttime versions of most cold and allergy medicines, is one of the most widely used sleep aids on the planet. Among adults over 60, it is extraordinarily common. Millions take it regularly. Many take it nightly. It is cheap, available everywhere, and carries the psychological comfort of something that feels gentle. It doesn't require a doctor. It's been around for decades. How dangerous could it be? Here is what most people who take it every night have never been told. Diphenhydramine is a powerful anticholinergic drug. That word, anticholinergic, is one of the most important words in cognitive neurology, and almost nobody outside a specialist's office has ever heard it. Let me explain what it means. Acetylcholine is your brain's primary memory and learning neurotransmitter. Think of it as the telephone network that allows your neurons to talk to each other during memory formation. When you learn something new, when a moment gets stamped and filed by the hippocampus, acetylcholine is carrying the signal. It is the voice on the line. Diphenhydramine works by blocking acetylcholine. That is literally how it makes you drowsy. It shuts down a significant part of your brain's signaling activity. It is, in the most direct sense, cutting the phone lines to the filing clerk. Every single night, for years. Now here is where the two problems collide. We know that the glymphatic system, the night shift cleaning crew, only operates properly during genuine deep sleep. Real, slow-wave sleep. The kind where your brain's electrical activity slows to a particular rhythm, where the cerebrospinal fluid floods through and does its work. Diphenhydramine does not produce that kind of sleep. It produces sedation. These are not the same thing. The brain activity during drug-induced sedation and the brain activity during natural slow-wave sleep are measurably, significantly different. When David swallowed that pill and closed his eyes, he felt asleep. He looked asleep. But his brain was not cycling through the deep stages where the glymphatic system activates. The cleaning crew never properly clocked in. So David had two things happening simultaneously, every night, for over a decade. His brain's memory network was being chemically suppressed. The acetylcholine blocked, the hippocampus unable to do its filing work. And his brain's waste clearance system was being shut out, the toxic proteins accumulating, night after night, with no cleanup shift to catch them. Neither of these effects was dramatic on any given night. One disrupted pill would not do this. 1 month would not do this. But 16 years of a nightly habit, 16 years of a brain that never fully cleaned, never fully filed, never fully completed the biological work that sleep exists to allow, that accumulates. Slowly, invisibly, in the same vulnerable regions, around the same overworked, increasingly burdened hippocampus. And here is what I want you to sit with before we go any further. David had no idea. His doctor had no idea. The pill had passed over-the-counter approval. It was legal, accessible, inexpensive, and felt harmless. The label did not say, "This will interfere with your brain's waste clearance system." The label did not say, "This does not produce natural sleep." The label said, "May cause drowsiness." That is the gap I am trying to close today. The brain doesn't fail suddenly. That is one of the most important things I can tell you, and also one of the cruelest. It fails gradually, the way a building falls apart when the maintenance crew has been skipping the same rooms for years. Nothing looks wrong from the outside. The hallways still look fine. The lights still work. And then one day, the ceiling comes down. What I want to walk you through now is how that process actually unfolds inside the brain. Biologically, specifically, year by year, because I think most people imagine damage as an event, a moment when something breaks. In reality, it is a slow accumulation. And understanding that changes how urgently you should be paying attention right now. Let's start with the waste. Every night that the glymphatic system doesn't complete its work, a small amount of beta amyloid is left behind. Not a catastrophic amount, just a residue. A thin film on the walls of the rooms the cleaning crew didn't reach. One night of poor clearance, barely noticeable. 1 year, a little more build-up in the same spots. 5 years, those spots are becoming sticky. Beta amyloid has a particular property. It clumps. Once it starts accumulating in a region, it begins to draw more to itself, and the clumping itself starts to interfere with blood flow and fluid movement in that area. Now here is where the cycle tightens. Because impaired glymphatic flow leads to amyloid accumulation. And amyloid accumulation in turn further impairs glymphatic flow. Each year makes the next year worse. The system that is supposed to clean up the problem becomes part of the problem. This bidirectional cycle is one of the key mechanisms researchers now believe underlies early Alzheimer's pathology. And it doesn't require any particular genetic risk. It just requires enough time and enough nightly interference. But there is a second process happening alongside the build-up, and this one is less talked about. It involves the brain's own immune cells, called microglia, which are constantly patrolling brain tissue, looking for damage to repair. When they encounter a region with accumulating proteins and restricted fluid flow, they respond the way any immune system responds to a persistent problem. They activate. They release inflammatory signals. They try to clean up what the glymphatic system couldn't. The trouble is that chronic activation changes them. Microglia that stay switched on too long stop being careful about what they target. The inflammation that was meant to protect begins to damage healthy neurons nearby. Synapses, the connections between neurons where memories actually live, start to degrade. And the hippocampus, which is already the most metabolically demanding and most amyloid-vulnerable region in the brain, takes the hardest hit. This is why the first symptom is almost always episodic memory. Names, recent conversations, where you put things. Not personality, not motor function, not language, not yet. Those networks sit in other regions. The hippocampus fails first because it was stressed first, and it was stressed most. Now add the anticholinergic burden on top of all of this. Not just one night of blocked acetylcholine, but years of it. Researchers use something called the anticholinergic cognitive burden scale to measure cumulative exposure to drugs like diphenhydramine. The higher the score, sustained over years, the more measurably it correlates with accelerated cognitive decline. This is not theoretical. It has been studied across large populations. The signal is consistent. By the time David came to see me, imaging showed changes in the regions I would expect. Patterns consistent with early impairment, concentrated around the hippocampus and the surrounding memory networks. The kind of changes that don't appear overnight. The kind that take years of compounding, nightly, quietly, in a brain that was working hard to compensate for what it wasn't able to fully clear. And here is the thing I need you to hear clearly. His trajectory was not fixed. The changes were real, but the story was not finished. Because the brain, even a brain that has been running on a compromised system for a decade is more resilient than most people believe. That resilience is what comes next. Before I tell you what we did for David, I want to make sure you know how to read the signs. Because one of the most common mistakes I see, and it runs in both directions, is getting this wrong. Some people dismiss things they should not dismiss. They chalk up real warning signs to tiredness, stress, aging, and they wait. And waiting costs them time they cannot get back. But the other mistake is just as harmful. People come into my clinic in a full panic because they forgot where they put their glasses, and they are convinced something is terribly wrong. That fear itself, chronic, unresolved, quietly humming in the background, creates its own kind of cognitive load. It is not good for the brain either. So let me give you a clear framework, one you can actually use. Normal aging looks like this. You go into a room and forget why you went. You get there, you pause, you retrace your steps mentally, and it comes back. That retracing is the key. A healthy hippocampus can initiate a search. It can go back through recent events and pull the thread. The file is there. It just takes a moment to retrieve. Normal aging looks like losing a word mid-sentence, reaching for it, not finding it in the moment, and then having it surface an hour later while you are doing something else entirely. That is the brain's retrieval system slowing down. Annoying. Expected, not alarming. Normal aging looks like occasionally forgetting an appointment you didn't write down, or mixing up the details of two similar conversations. This is not the same as forgetting the conversation happened. Now, here is what is not normal. Forgetting that a conversation happened at all. Not the details, the entire event. Someone you trust tells you that you spoke yesterday about something important, and there is nothing there. No faint outline of it, just blank. Asking the same question multiple times in one sitting. Not once, because you were distracted. 3 or 4 times, within the same hour, because the answer genuinely does not stick. This is the filing clerk failing to stamp the document. It lands on the desk and slides right off. Not recognizing a face or a name that should be completely automatic. David's situation. Looking at a spouse of 4 decades and not connecting a name is an extreme example of this. But earlier, subtler versions come first. Trouble placing a familiar neighbor. Taking longer than expected to recognize someone out of context. A hesitation where there should be none. There is also a set of signs that caregivers notice long before the person themselves does. This is important. The person experiencing early hippocampal decline often has no awareness that anything is wrong. The very system responsible for logging gaps in memory is the system that is failing. Elena noticed something was off more than 2 years before David came to see me. She watched him lose the thread of television programs he had always followed. She noticed him withdraw from group conversations, not because he had nothing to say, but because tracking multiple voices at once had become quietly exhausting. She saw him cover small lapses with humor, smoothly, in a way that looked social, but was actually protective. That pattern, withdrawing from situations that demand memory work, covering lapses with deflection or humor, slight irritability when pressed to recall something, is a behavioral fingerprint worth knowing. It is not personality change. It is the brain conserving resources. And there is one specific warning sign that I find is almost always missed in early evaluation. Difficulty following a conversation when more than 2 people are speaking at once. Losing the thread of a layered story. The brain can still manage a one-on-one exchange for quite a long time, but multi-stream processing is one of the first things to degrade when the hippocampus and surrounding networks are under pressure. The moment to act is not when it becomes undeniable. It is when it first becomes noticeable. Early evaluation changes outcomes in a way that later evaluation simply cannot. That is not a motivational statement. That is the biology. So let me give you something concrete. Because awareness without a clear path forward is just anxiety with better vocabulary. You deserve more than that. The first thing I want you to do tonight is open your medicine cabinet. Not tomorrow, tonight. Look for diphenhydramine. It is the active ingredient in Benadryl, but it also hides inside ZzzQuil, Unisom sleep tabs, Nitol, and nearly every combination nighttime cold and allergy product on the shelf. The ones with PM in the name. If you or someone you love takes any of these regularly, that is the conversation that needs to happen with a doctor this week. Not eventually, this week. I want to be clear about something important. I am not telling you to stop abruptly on your own. The point here is not panic. The point is awareness and a structured conversation with your physician about safer, evidence-based alternatives. Stopping abruptly after a long habit can disrupt sleep further in the short term, and your doctor needs to be part of that transition. What I am asking you to do right now is simply know what is in the bottle. The second step is understanding what actually supports deep, glymphatic activating sleep, without suppressing the very system you are trying to protect. Consistent sleep and wake times are not a suggestion. They are the foundation. Your glymphatic system is linked to your circadian rhythm. When you wake and sleep at irregular hours, even if the total time in bed is the same, the deep, slow-wave phases that activate waste clearance are shorter and shallower. Pick a wake time and hold it, including weekends. That single adjustment is one of the most powerful things you can do for brain health, and it costs nothing. Your room should be cool. Not cold, but meaningfully cooler than most people keep it. A cooler sleep environment helps your body temperature drop, which is one of the biological triggers for deep, slow-wave sleep. If you have been sleeping in a warm room for years, a cooler one will feel unfamiliar at first. That feeling passes within a few days. Alcohol in the evening deserves an honest look. I know this is not what people want to hear, but alcohol fragments deep sleep even when it helps you fall asleep. You drift off more easily, and then, as the alcohol clears in the middle of the night, your brain rebounds toward lighter stages. The cleaning crew gets interrupted right when it needs to work. Limiting alcohol to earlier in the evening, well before bed, makes a measurable difference to sleep architecture. The third step is one of the simplest adjustments with real biological support behind it. Sleep on your side. Research into glymphatic drainage suggests lateral sleep position, on either side, improves the flow of cerebrospinal fluid through the brain's cleaning channels compared to sleeping flat on your back. This is a zero-cost change you can make tonight. If you are a back sleeper by habit, a pillow positioned against your back can help you stay on your side through the night. The fourth step is hydration timing. The cerebrospinal fluid that drives glymphatic clearance is affected by how hydrated you are. Mild dehydration, the kind that is very common in older adults who limit fluids in the evening to avoid nighttime bathroom trips, thickens that fluid and impairs its flow. The solution is not drinking a large glass of water right before bed. It is drinking steadily through the day, tapering off gently in the late evening, so you enter sleep well hydrated without disrupting it. The fifth step is the one that requires the most direct action. If memory concerns are already present, for you or for someone you care for, ask your doctor specifically for a cognitive screening using validated tools. The MOCA, the Montreal Cognitive Assessment, is the one I use most often. It takes about 10 minutes, and it is far more sensitive to early changes than the brief memory questions in a standard checkup. Ask for it by name. You have every right to that information. And if you are the spouse, the adult child, the person who has been quietly watching and worrying, frame the conversation around curiosity, not alarm. I read something about a sleep habit that surprised me. Opens a door that fear often closes permanently. David stopped the diphenhydramine, not on his own and not overnight. His primary care physician helped him taper off it carefully while we referred him to a sleep specialist who specializes in something called CBTI, Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Insomnia. I want to spend a moment on this because it matters. CBTI is not a pill. It is a structured retraining of the thoughts and behaviors that have taught a brain to fight sleep instead of welcome it. For most people with chronic insomnia, those patterns, lying awake worrying about lying awake, associating the bedroom with wakefulness, reaching for a pill because the alternative feels impossible, are learned, and what is learned can be unlearned. The evidence for CBTI is strong. For long-term insomnia, it outperforms medication. It does not suppress the glymphatic system. It does not block acetylcholine. It works by restoring the conditions that allow natural sleep to happen on its own. David committed to it. It was not easy in the first few weeks. His sleep actually felt worse before it got better, which is normal and expected, and which his sleep specialist had prepared him for. But he stayed with it. Within 3 months, Eleanor called my office. She said something I have heard versions of before, and it never stops meaning something to me. She said it felt like a fog had thinned. He was sharper in the mornings. He was following their conversations more easily. He was laughing at things he would have missed a few months earlier. At his 6-month follow-up, his cognitive assessment showed stabilization. Not a reversal. I want to be honest with you about what that means. The changes that had accumulated over 16 years did not simply erase themselves in 6 months. That is not how biology works. But the trajectory had changed. The decline that had been quietly accelerating had leveled. The system that had been running compromised was now running better. His brain had more to work with. Eleanor told me that the habit had been hiding in plain sight for so long that no one had ever thought to look at it. Not his internist, not his cardiologist, not the pharmacist who filled the bottle hundreds of times, not David himself. It had never been on anyone's radar because no one had asked, and David had never thought to mention it. That gap between what people do every single night and what their doctors know about it is exactly the space this conversation is trying to close. Not every story has the outcome David and Elena had. The earlier the intervention, the more the brain has to work with. David was fortunate that Elena paid attention, that she trusted what she saw, that she came in when she did and not 2 years later. But here is what I want you to understand before we go any further. Removing the thing that was blocking the system is only half of the equation. Because even with the glymphatic system running better, even with the acetylcholine no longer suppressed every night, there is still a second process that has likely been building quietly for years. And if you don't address it directly, it will continue working against everything you just corrected. The glymphatic system needs a clear path to do its work. You now understand what was blocking it, and you know what to do about that. That part of the picture is solid. But while the cleaning crew was falling behind, night after night, year after year, something else was accumulating inside the brain's blood vessels. A different kind of buildup. Slower, stickier. And it doesn't go away just because the sleep improves. It has to be addressed on its own terms. There is a specific compound that most people over 60 are not getting enough of. Something your brain uses every morning to clear this vascular buildup and keep the channels that feed the glymphatic system open and flowing properly. Without it, the cleaning crew does its work, but the pipes that carry the results out are still narrowing. The whole system stays compromised. That is what the next video is about. It is on your screen right now. And I would not frame it as optional, not after what we just covered. If you stop here, you have removed one obstacle, but the other one is still there, still working quietly, still narrowing the margin your brain has to stay clear. Watch it now. What you just fixed deserves to be protected.